How much of the reading did you do?
I read some of it.
Okay, so all right, this is good for me to know. So I kind of had two lesson plans. One for if you had done all the reading, and one if you had done none of the reading. So everybody seems to be in the middle. So
Yes.
I'm going to give you a couple questions related to the content, and then we'll talk it through, and then we'll revisit the chapters, and then just go over those points. So that's my plan tonight. And some of the stuff that I had as the big grand scheme for tonight is we'll definitely discuss the Matthew Perry expedition and the Black Ships and Samurai, which is what that era is called. It's a really interesting moment in history. And then connect the dots with between westward expansion and the Perry expedition. That sounds like they're not related. I actually mentioned this, I think, way back in the summer, cause and effect. Then we'll do a few short answer questions, and then I'll show you a cool little video about World War I, and that'll start to make chapter 22 make more sense, and try to go over the Treaty of Versailles and Bolshevik Revolution. And I will give you, I'll save this one for homework. I'll look into various countries and the positions they took in World War I. So that's the plan for tonight. Are you excited?
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, can anybody guess my background tonight?
Let me see.
It's local.
It says 20th Massachusetts.
It is. It is. I'll get out of the way. Can anybody guess where this is?
Faneuil Hall. I was just guessing, sorry.
I've been here before.
Not too far. You've been there. Yeah. It's
I
one
don't
of the major tourist
I don't
attractions.
remember where it is. I've been here before.
I'll give you a hint. Copley Square.
Yeah, I'm not good with names.
I think we've been here in 5th grade, Joey.
Yeah.
Near a couple blocks away from Newbury Street, near the Prudential Building. I don't know what else to say. Boston Marathon goes pretty close to it.
I don't know what this place is called.
Me neither.
Oh, okay. It's the library. It's the Boston Public Library, like right there in Copley Square.
Oh.
By the and then there's like the back bay is between two train stations. Like there's Copley Square, the green line, and then the orange line, back bay, and it's right in between those two. Dartmouth Street and Boylston Street and Dartmouth Street. Anyway, so yeah, I decided to it might be fun to just start using a background of a public space that we know and love, but is inaccessible at the moment. Might make us feel all warm and fuzzy inside. So let's get to it. All right. So here for chapter 19, this is a trick question. The beginning of chapter 19 picks up where with what I was talking about last week with the Taiping Rebellion. Who can recall what we learned about the Taiping Rebellion last week? Think chicken that's sweet and spicy.
General Tso's chicken.
I knew it would stick. Yeah, General Tso's chicken. Who it's named after who?
Who was it? Shoot. No, it's not him. What is the name? I don't know.
Oh, Zuo Zhongtang. Zuo Zhongtang.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he's kind of an obscure figure. He's not going to show up.
Wait, is he a cook? He was a cook, right?
No, he's somewhat of an obscure figure in history. He doesn't really show up on the AP World History, but you want to know the guy he was trying to stop. Here's a hint. He's from Guangzhou. He failed the imperial examination multiple times, never got to reach his dream of working for the Qing imperial court. Then he started reading a Chinese translation of the Bible, and decided that he was the baby brother of Jesus. No joke.
Yeah.
What's his
Oh
name?
yeah, is that
What's his name? No joke. Stranger than fiction. This is what I love about teaching history. I'm serious.
And
These are
people
moments
believe him.
when it's like,
my
when
God.
you look at the real world, it's twice as insane as anything you could read in fantasy. The real world is always crazier than stuff you can make up. What's his name?
Zhou Zhongtang.
Oh, close. He's the general who wanted to stop this guy. Well, he's from Guangzhou, but he tried to make a capital. They tried to bring the capital back to Nanjing. Okay, I think the name Red. It sounds like red.
Hong. Wow.
That's it.
Hong.
There's
Hong Chuan. Hong Xiu.
Hong Shu
Hong
Chuan.
Xiu Chuan.
Hong Shu Chuan.
My mom knows it.
So here's yeah. Okay, so here's my question. How did the Taiping Rebellion challenge the Qing dynasty? And that's what's discussed in chapter 19. How did the Taiping Rebellion challenge the Qing dynasty? And that, I think I'll go with that one first because that's where I left off last week. Guess what? I think your mom is going to get an A on this test.
你知道吗？太平天国运动对秦国。
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't mean.
Okay, can anybody describe how the Taiping Rebellion challenged the Qing dynasty? Yes or no? Joey, Sophia? Okay, if not, let's go into the text. Here we go. So now we're going to go directly
There was the
into
rebellion.
chapter 19. Here we go. All right. So here we are. Crisis within. Okay, so these few paragraphs right here describe the Taiping Rebellion, which was a civil war in China coinciding with the US Civil War, in fact. All right. Let's start.
Oh, this was after the Opium War? Right after?
Yes. Yeah, after the first Opium War, it was. Yep. Correct. First and second, yeah. So yeah, good timeline there. 1841, that's Opium War. All right. So what I'm gonna read this paragraph right here, and then I'll ask Joey to pick it up right here, and then Sophia can pick it up right here, and I'll go back to my original question. And I think I'm going to use my spotlight capability. That's not it. Anyway, so everybody sees my screen where I'm reading from?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. So it talks about the Industrial Revolution, talks about, China post-opium wars, where there's a lot of how should I say, exploitation, political uncertainty, and so forth. So, combination of circumstances traditionally associated with a declining dynasty gave rise to growing numbers of bandit gangs roaming the countryside, and even more dangerous, to outright peasant rebellion. What is peasant rebellion?
There's a rebellion
It's just a rebellion
of
of
the
the
peasants.
peasants against.
Right, it's poor people rising up, wanting to overthrow the powers that be. This is foreshadowing a little bit of what's going to happen in the future for, say, the next 100 years of in China. Beginning in the late 18th century, such rebellions drew on a variety of peasant grievances, and found leadership in charismatic figures proclaiming a millenarian religious message. So here comes Hong Xiuquan. Increasingly, they also expressed opposition to the Qing dynasty because of its foreign Manchu origins. We wait only for the northern region, that's the Manchus, to return to the Han Emperor, declared one rebel group in the early 19th century. All right, so that describes the political uncertainty, that anger towards the Qing dynasty, particularly because they were Manchus, an ethnic minority. Go for it, Joey, the culmination.
The culmination of China's, or the culmination of China's internal crisis lay in the Taiping Uprising, which set much of the country aflame between 1850 and 1864. This was a different kind of peasant upheaval. Its leaders largely rejected Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism alike, finding their primary ideology in a unique form of Christianity. Its leading figure, Hong Xiuquan, proclaimed himself as the younger brother of Jesus, sent to cleanse the world of demons and establish a heavenly kingdom of great peace. Nor were these leaders content to restore an idealized Chinese society. Instead, they insisted on genuinely revolutionary change. They called for the abolition of private property, a radical redistribution of land, the end of prostitution and opium smoking, and the organization of society into sexually segregated military camps of men and women. Hong fiercely denounced the Qing dynasty and it as foreigners who had poisoned China and defiled the emperor's throne. His cousin Hong
Ringan.
Rengan developed plans for transforming China into an industrial nation, complete with roads, health insurance for all, newspapers, and widespread public education. Among the most revolutionary.
All right. So it sounds like yeah. Let's stop right there. It sounds like, Hong Xiuquan, he's got this strict ideology, but it seems like he has a plan. The way I've spoken about him before, this guy thinks he's Jesus's little brother, so he must be nuts. He actually, when you look at this paragraph, what about his message was appealing to people living at the time?
The rebellion. Never mind.
Say it again, Sophia.
I was saying like the rebellion. So like people like his idea.
Well, wait a minute. It says right here, we're going to abolish private property. Do you have older people in your family who play a card game called like The Greedy Landlord, which is Dadi Zhu, Dadi?
Is it Dodi?
Yeah, that's an old card game that dates back to like this, like a peasant uprising. It's like the landlord owns everything and crushes the peasants. He wants to get rid of all private property, which 100 years from this time, guess who will take power and do just that in 1949? I'll give you a hint. He's on the money now.
England.
100 years from this time. So fast forward from the Taiping Rebellion, 100 years later.
Japan.
Mao Zedong.
There you go. There you go.
Oh.
Right. There you go. So Joey. So yeah. So the reason I mentioned that is because you can kind of see why there's this anger going on between the general public. And he says redistribution of land, end of prostitution and opium smoking. So we see the kind of drug problem, and he wants to just militarize everybody. It's gonna be this nation of soldiers, male and female soldiers. And then he says, denounce the Qing dynasty. They're foreigners who have poisoned the country. And then he wants widespread public education. So to a lot of people at this, Yeah, so a lot of people at this time who feel like they don't have a shot in life, who feel like who don't like the powers structure as it is, even though this guy is a bit kooky and telling everyone he's related to Jesus, the message actually might sound appealing to some people. Hey, and then and you can see why he got such a big following in a way. Sophia, let's read the next. Sophia, you can read the next paragraph here.
Okay. Among the
All
most.
right. Oh, whoops, I'm sorry. I went
Isn't
too
like
fast.
2 lines before it.
I went to the next page. Sorry. I went to the next page. Here we go. All right. Among the most revolutionary.
Among the most revolutionary dimensions of the Taiping uprising was its posture towards women and the gender roles. This outlook reflected its origins among the minority Hakka people of southern China, where people were women or no notably less restricted than Confucian or Orthodoxy prescribed. During the uprising, Hakka women whose feet had never been bound fought as soldiers in their own
regiments
in liberated regions. Taiping officials ordered that the feet of the other women be unbound. Their land reform program promised women and men equal shares of land. Women are now permitted to sit for civil service examinations and were appointed to supervisory positions, though usually where they exercised authority over other women rather than men. Mutual attractions rather than family interest was promoted from the basis for marriage.
All right. So the next 3 paragraphs, we don't have to read through those, but I think those 3 give an interesting sense of how big a deal the Taiping Rebellion was and how much of a threat it was to the Qing dynasty in particular. So in your own words, how would you both describe this question? How did the Taiping Rebellion challenge the Qing dynasty? It's a broad question. Who wants to go first?
Not me.
Go for it, Joey.
It challenged the Qing dynasty because it said the Qing dynasty was a poison to China. And they also want to make women equal to men and get rid of private property altogether.
Yeah, pretty good. I think that sums it up pretty nicely. Anything you want to add, Sophia?
Nope. I think that's
okay. All right. Let's see. Have you guys ever been to a Hakka region like Meizhou or Fuzhou?
I don't know what that is.
It's something. Hakka people are quite interesting because after the Taiping Rebellion, they started to migrate.
Oh yeah,
a lot.
Yes.
And the name Hakka in Chinese actually just means guest house. Ke, like Ke and
I just
Jia,
looked it up.
guest house.
That was interesting.
And it's they became this like really migrant minority community after this, and in some ways are still kind of this floating people, mostly in the South. Anyway, but that won't be on the AP exam. It's just interesting stuff to study later. Okay, so let's go about 80 years before the Taiping Rebellion to Qianlong, the beginning of the chapter. Describe Qianlong's foreign policy. And this is a trick question. Who could describe Emperor Qianlong's foreign policy?
Why is it a trick question?
What's foreign policy?
What is foreign policy?
Yeah, what's foreign policy?
It's a policy from somewhere else.
For somewhere else.
Like who you trade with, how you conduct international relations and so forth, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a trick question because Qianlong really didn't have any foreign policy at all. This is right at the end of the Ming Dynasty, towards most of the Qing. China dips into this.
Isolation.
Oh.
Isolationism. So that's why it's a trick question. And then the chapter goes into a lot of British envoys who came to, who tried to get into China to trade. And this is about 80 years before the first Opium War. And repeatedly, Qianlong would say, no, we're not interested. And eventually Qianlong did liberalize one little area of, which was also funny enough, where Hong Xiuquan is from, in Guangzhou, and it became like, you ever heard of the Shisanhang, 13 factories?
Nope.
I've
Okay.
heard of it in TV.
It basically, before the first Opium War, from my math might be off, but it's like roughly about in the 18th century, roughly 1780s, one little corner, one little speck. It's earlier than that. I'm sorry, 1750s or 60s. One little speck of China, foreign countries could do trade. And the last, and countries would be able to go in. Only, it was men only. Women were not allowed in this. And this is how William Jardine, who was the opium trader, he would go in and out to the British Hong, which was more like a kind of a trading house. And this is where this would become ground zero for the Opium Wars. But essentially, aside from allowing foreign trade in one little place in the South, Qianlong really wanted zero interaction with the rest of the world. Nothing whatsoever. And I'll show you the pages where that is mentioned. It's just before the Taiping Rebellion. Here we go. Whoop, actually, no, it's after. Come on. Oh yeah, 1793, Chinese rejects British request for open trade. Oh, it is right here. Oh, okay. Here is oh yeah, here it is. Reversal of fortune. All right, that's where it is. Okay. Qianlong argues, our celestial empire poses all things prolific abundance, he declared. There was therefore no need to import manufacturers from outside barbarians. So while the Industrial Revolution in England is really taking off, why might England want to be pushing its goods to China?
Because you have leftovers.
Exactly. They have a surplus of all this, stuff they're making. And China is a big market, but how does isolationism factor into that?
They rejected them.
Exactly. If you have an emperor who says, we are just fine as we are, we don't want anyone going out, we don't want anyone coming in, thank you, but no, thank you. So that's essentially why it's a trick question. His foreign policy was stay away. That's it. Let's see. And yeah, his foreign policy is we don't like you, any of you. Next question I've got from this. Yep. Okay, Ottoman Empire. It's mentioned only in 2 pages.
Oh, I learned about this.
What threatened, cool. What threatened to erode the Ottoman Empire in the 19th century? Eroding means like, decreasing. And this is a couple of different, it's another open-ended question. You want to take this one, Sophia?
World War I. That's one. The World War.
Well, the 19th century is before World War One.
Oh, true.
But
don't know about
you're right. That would be like the last nail in the coffin with the Young Turks and the independent Turkey. But before that, this is Ottoman Empire in the 19th century. It's still pretty big. It's across, spreading across the North Africa and Mediterranean and so forth.
Yes.
Anyone want to take a crack at it, or shall we go back to the chapter?
I actually should know this. I feel bad now. Oh.
It's what the whole class is for. It's what studying is all about. Shall we go into it?
Sure.
Or tell me, what are you thinking? What's on your mind?
I don't.
Okay,
I just know.
Joey, you have any thoughts? Okay.
World War One.
That's what I said,
You know,
Joey.
one thing
Oh,
I
wait,
just realized is kind of funny is eventually Sean is, and so is Sean's mother. So at some point, Sean's mother and Sean are going to be together, sharing a bowl, eating ice cream from the same spoon, watching Joey and Sophia go, oh. But never mind, just kidding. It won't be like that.
Wow.
Anyway.
Because we learned this in
Sean.
class, and I feel like I should know it because I did my project on Ottoman Empire.
I'm just kidding.
No, I just feel bad.
So that's a wink at Sean. We miss you, Sean, when you're watching this recording. I know
Hi,
you're
good
busy.
luck
We
on your
miss you.
homework, or whatever you're doing.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I hope you're having fun with, astrophysics or whatever it is you're studying right now. Oh,
That was so.
going to the wrong slide.
Wait, is it actually astrophysics?
I have no idea what he's studying.
That
He
That was
just
so
said
random.
it was random. I don't know. So, okay, yes, here we go. Let's go to the Ottoman Empire. That's coming up after the Opium Wars. We've already learned about Lin Zexu, and okay, there we go. Look how huge the Ottoman Empire used to be. Okay, so let's look at, here's what's happening with the Ottoman Empire. The French Revolution creates a power vacuum in France, and there's new leadership in France, and France wants to flex. This new leader in France, I'm going to give you a hint. He's really short.
Napoleon.
Thank you. All right, I knew you'd get it. Okay. And south is one of these locations that Napoleon wants to venture. So this becomes one of the threats to the Ottoman Empire. So here we go. Now, Russia is also a land-based empire at this time. It's before the Bolshevik Revolution that's going to happen at the same time as the First World War. Russia is going to be involved. Let's see how this works. Okay. I'll read the first paragraph and then I'll pass it on. Okay. In 1750, the Ottoman Empire was still the central political fixture of a widespread Islamic world. From its Turkish heartland of Anatolia it ruled over much of the Arab world from which Islam had come. It protected pilgrims on their way to Mecca, governed Egypt and coastal North Africa, and incorporated millions of Christians in the Balkans. Its ruler, the Sultan, claimed the role of Caliph, the successor of Prophet Muhammad, and was widely viewed as as the leader, defender, and primary representative of the Islamic world. But by the middle and certainly by the end of the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire was no longer able to deal with Europe from a position of equality, let alone superiority. Among the great powers of the West, it was known as the stickman of Europe within the Muslim world. The Ottoman Empire, once viewed the strong sword of Islam, was unable to prevent region after region, India, and that would be colonized by whom?
England,
England,
There you go. Indonesia, colonized by whom?
America. Wait, no, that
The
was not the
Dutch.
place. Oh, never
The
mind.
Dutch, yep. West Africa, and that's going to be a combination of France and Portugal and England.
Everyone.
Central Asia, from falling under the control of Christian powers, and really by Christian powers they mean Western Europe. So this is how this is. Does everybody get the idea of the Ottoman Empire was no longer able to deal with Europe from a position of equality, let alone superiority? Does everybody get what that means?
They're
yeah,
not
like
powerful
they fall behind.
anymore.
Yeah. Joey's got it right. They did fall behind because in the 13th and the 12th and 13th century, this is kind of the end of the golden age of Islam, where Baghdad is like this intellectual,
God.
there's a lot coming out of the Middle East. There's a lot of ideas, astronomy, mathematics. There's a lot, remember we studied Mansa Musa and his pilgrimage,
Yeah,
and all of these powerful empires of the Muslim world from across Africa to the Middle East, when they're really shining and showing how powerful they are, Europe is still in the dark ages and trying to start the Crusades and just creating chaos. So Europe is just a big mess in the centuries prior. Now that Western Europe is starting to become more of a force to be reckoned with, and France and Portugal and England are grabbing territory around the world, it's the Ottoman Empire that's starting to unravel a bit. Does that make sense?
yes.
Cool. All right. Sophia, you can take the next paragraph right here.
Okay. Ottoman Empire's own domains shrank considerably at the hands of Russia. British, Austrian, and French aggression. In 1798, Napoleon's invasions of Egypt, which had long been a province of the Ottoman Empire, was particularly stunning blow. A contemporary observer,
Abd al-Rahman al-Jabarti.
that described
That
the
guy.
French entry of the Carol. Sorry, I'm gonna read that.
Cairo. Yeah, it's okay. And anyway, we don't have to read this. This would be the primary source, a quote, a witness to French occupation of Egypt. Okay. Now this last little tiny paragraph, Joey, you can take this. When the French left,
When the French left a virtually independent Egypt, pursued a modernizing and empire-building program of its own, and on one occasion came close to toppling the Ottoman Empire itself.
this is important because once the Ottoman Empire is this, far-flung place where different countries, I should say different territories with different histories, in multiple identities are under this one branch of an empire. And when they're colonized once they become colonized and then gain independence, they don't seem to want to go back to being a part of another colony again. They start to want their own identity. And that's what's happening. That's what happened here with Egypt. So and then we start to see on the next page, a gradual shrinking of the Ottoman Empire here. And that's what this map is. So yeah, who can identify the purple, the kind of a khaki color and the green color?
The green one's Ottoman.
Well, it says right.
Oh,
Well,
it's
it's
right there.
dates. It at one point this was all Ottoman territory
This is what
until
they lost.
yeah, and it gives a timeline. This is all considered recent, like modern world history in the past 200 years or so. So here we go. Tunisia, this is North Africa. So present day Tunisia and Algeria. Territory lost 1800 to 1877. These places would eventually fall under European hands and then gain independence, as well as Libya and Egypt. And then Romania, Bulgaria, and by the start of World War I, the Ottoman Empire, I'm going to change my color scheme right here. By the start of World War I, where I'm drawing into the pink, this is where the Ottoman Empire will remain. Just this little swath. Well, it's not little, it's huge. It's Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and the Arabian Peninsula. So essentially, and right here is Mecca. So anyone going on their Hajj, their pilgrimage, the Ottomans are still the gatekeepers of that for the Muslim world. But that's a pretty fast decline. That's, if you look at 1800 to 1914, that's 100 years losing about 60 to 70% of territory.
It's a lot.
Yeah. So when I was talking about the erosion of the Ottoman Empire, Sophia said World War I. That's true because Turkey would gain independence with the young. But before that, it was gradually shrinking. And now that's the easy part. Here's the hard part. Who can explain why?
Why there's the independence of Turkey?
Yeah, why was the Ottoman Empire gradually shrinking?
Because
Or
the territory is
eroding.
big, so they can't really control it anymore. Is that why?
You want to back that up a little bit.
Get up.
That definitely, you could definitely make that argument, but you have to give examples.
Egypt.
Okay, yeah, Egypt was an example. What happened in Egypt?
It got taken by the
Who's she
Napoleon.
looking for? There you go. So you could say,
Yeah.
make the argument like this, due to a number of factors, and then you could make the argument saying a very large territory that the Ottomans were unable to control from a centralized place in Istanbul, and the fact that with Western European powers such as France and England, France in particular in the case of the Ottoman Empire, looking to gain more territory became a threat, and gradually, and then you would finish your sentence. You'd think of it all as like you're writing short answer questions on a test. Let's keep going. We got 45 minutes to go. let's go into the fun stuff, the Perry
Oh
expedition.
yeah,
Okay, so this is fun.
Matthew.
If we look at this Japanese woodblock print, oh, what were you saying?
Oh, I was just. Is that the Matthew one? Like his name? Matthew.
Yeah, this is
Okay.
yeah, here's the primary source given. How would you describe this image of Admiral Matthew Perry by Japanese artists? What do you think it looks like?
Bad guys.
Is this a flattering depiction?
Characters.
Oh, this was drawn by the Japanese, like of Perry.
Yes, yeah. Yeah,
Oh,
these are Japanese. Well, one thing about opening Japan is that a lot of Japanese art, such as woodblock prints and paintings without a lot of distance, are going to flood the European market. And this is, let's go to, this was from the chapter itself. Let's go right to it. Here we go. Back to the chapter. Come on, Perry. Nope, that's 22. I'm sorry. That's also, wait, yes, this is it, 19. There are the Ottomans. Come on. There it is. There. No. This is the Ottomans again. There we are. There we are. So it says right here, viewing Americans. And I know it looks tiny from the screen. I'll just read it. This print shows a Japanese view of Admiral Perry on the right and his second in command on the left, no long after the Americans' unwelcome arrival in Japan. So in many ways, of course, they're not happy because much like China during the Qing dynasty, Tokugawa Japan was in a period of very strict, rigid what? I'm going to write the word again.
Isolationism.
So
isolation. Oh, yes.
Isolation. So yes, Japan was also in this, abided by this isolationism. We don't need anyone. So the shogunate of Japan, I forgot the name, but it's in this chapter, also believed we do not need to trade. And during the Industrial Revolution in particular, this was a big mistake for the Japanese. Why?
Because everyone thought they fell behind.
Big time. They still have samurai, they're still fighting with samurai swords in the 19th century. Much of the world, and suddenly Matthew Perry shows up with 3 modern steamships with coal smoke bellowing from them, and these ships can move really fast, and they've all got huge guns on them. So
Whoa.
Japan doesn't have much of a, so very much like, you know, he shows up and he says, he brings a translator and says, we want to trade with you. We will come back. And eventually Japan doesn't go to war, and they are forced to open trade, but the shogunate looks pretty weak, and eventually there will be internal conflicts. This will start the Meiji Restoration, and Japan will start to modernize at a rapid pace. So within about 80 years, Japan is going to go from this isolated, backward, island country to this feisty, angry, militarized country that starts to try to invade its neighbors. Does that make sense? You see the ripple effect I'm describing?
Yeah.
Exactly. If we're looking, when we look at the Second World War, or before that, it was before the Second World War. By the 1920s, Japan was trying to go to war, went to war with Russia. That's one neighbor. Occupied Korea, At the first, the Sino-Japanese War, and it's all happening right after the Meiji Restoration. So if we look at, we know the future from this period, we know Japan is going to start to become ultra militarized. It's going to join, Hitler and Mussolini in World War II, a fascist country. How does this happen? How do they go from being this isolated country that doesn't want to bother anyone to being the bully who wants to occupy everything around it?
Because they
Who
got
could
powerful.
tell that story? But where does the US come into play?
I want to say. Wait. No, I'm probably wrong. Never mind.
Well, think about it. Think about it. The US forced Japan to do what? To trade.
Trade.
Right. So they were forced under threat of open war to do what they didn't want to do.
Trade.
I don't know if everybody's with me. Let me use a few. I think I've got a few other materials to explain this. This is a cool story, so I'm going to use some slides that I've used for a different class, but to tell the same story. Here we go. Okay, so let's connect the dots with, okay. All right, so this is also another woodblock print, and these are Japanese artists depicting an American ship and its giant mast and 3 sails and steam coming out. The steam is coming out right here. There's a lot of really great art came from this particular event.
Kind of creepy.
It is kind of
Yeah.
creepy, yeah. And that's the point. It's the idea of this, these outsiders, these foreigners are, the bad guys. We should be scared of them. You guys have seen it. Whoops, in Massachusetts, you guys have seen. I'm doing kind of telling a longer roundabout story. What was the U.S. interest in Japan? Why Japan?
Because China.
Here's the answer.
Sorry, I thought they wanted to
That
do
will
the
not-
same thing as
that
the
will-
Philippines.
That would be the Philippines, but this is now the 1850s. The U.S. won't take the Philippines until 1900 to 1902, after the Spanish-American Wars. Good guess. The answer is what I just was on this license plate.
Wales.
Whales, yes. This is the endangered species of America. Whale oil used to run, this country in a way. Our founding documents, the Declaration of Independence, these founding documents that are holding together what seems to be our, the reason why we have this democracy which won't allow Donald Trump to, pretend he's still president, is because we have a set of rules and principles that were applied in founding documents. We have a separation of powers, and all those documents were written by candlelight, which came from oil, which came from these gigantic mammals. Whale oil. Whales were big business in early America, which is why they're an endangered species now. Here is a chart from the US Navy in the 1850s. So here is 1851, and it says whale chart. And this is a map of the Pacific Ocean. There's Australia, and we've got Japan. It's highlighted right here. And take a look at what's around Japan. Whales.
Wales. Oh, they're all
Whales.
around it.
Yes, and even today, Japan is still one of the few countries in the world that still allows whale hunting out of tradition. That's a whole nother debate. but the US had overhunted whales around our territory and wanted to seek, whales elsewhere because whale oil was still a big commodity. Eventually, we would drill for oil in the ground, but that's not going to happen for another 30, 40 years. So what's cool about that, what's interesting about this, if we look at, our own lifetime, war with Iraq was largely about what?
Oil.
Whales.
Oil.
Oh.
Oil reserves. The threat to go to war with Japan in the 1850s was also about oil, in a way. Natural resources, this thirst for energy. So this is kind of a chronology of whaling ships. Not going to go into it too much, but whaling was a big business, especially in New England, particularly, Providence, New Bedford. Now, here are some territorial acquisitions. In the Barron's textbook, who can tell me when did the US gain this territory right here?
Purchased it from France in 1803.
1803.
Boom. Yes. And I know you sound encyclopedic, but it's on the chart. But you're absolutely right. So you can see the breadth of the Louisiana Purchase. That doubles this country. So the annexation of Texas, and then eventually, you're going to have a purchase of Oklahoma in the 1840s. And then we're going to see right before Perry's expedition, the US gains what territory? What am I pointing at here? Mexico. So in US history classes, all of this is called what? Westward
Expansion.
There you go. So westward expansion. So what's further west beyond California? Once Mexico is taken, and California gives the US another ocean, what is further west?
Hawaii. Sorry. No, that was not it.
Well, yes, but you're skipping this event. You're going further ahead to the Spanish-American War.
Or
Further west in the case, we're looking at Japan. And this is the whole agenda and now Japan was never colonized, but they were forced to open for trade. And that would eventually start the Meiji Restoration. So, never mind. What was I looking for? Oh yeah, this one. Okay, so I'm going to show you a very, very short clip of Perry's expedition, and then I think it'll solidify a bit more the gravity of it, and then I'll move on to the other material. Does everyone get that cause and effect? Westward expansion, forcing Japan to open for trade, Japan changing internally, going from an isolated, backward country to this super developed, super militarized, aggressive country.
So they forced them to trade, and they did trade. So they become powerful.
Right.
Okay.
In a nutshell, but I still think it's a kind of a confusing concept to wrap your head around. That's why I want to show you like this animated sequence to kind of solidify the steps, because it's not like somebody pushes a button and Japan becomes powerful and developed. It's a process over a century. Hold on 1 second. Here we go. There we go. Okay, so here's a short segment which I think goes into more of the nuances of Perry's expedition. Oh, come on.
We don't, and we don't hear the sounds. Sorry.
Oh, you can't? Oh, thank you for telling me that. I will
I was looking
optimize
at
the share
captions for
again. I'm so glad. Okay. Optimize the share. It is. I forgot to optimize the share. Ha, 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 ha. Optimize for sound. Okay, here it is. All right, so here it is. Okay, so I'll just start right here. Okay, for 200 years, the show, and by the way, there had been Jesuit missionaries in the 18th century that were kicked out of Japan. And that's when the Tokugawa period really became strict isolationist, right? Kind of like the Boxer Rebellion in a way. They wanted to kick out missionaries. But that, and then for 200 years, Japan was super, super isolated. And then the Americans come.
Japan had managed to keep the alien barbarians at bay for more than 200 years. But now in the mid-19th century, the West was poised to assert itself.
The shogun is faced with a strategic threat on three fronts. From the north, the Russians are coming. From the south, the British are coming. And ultimately from the east, the Americans come.
The new country of the United States of America was on the move. Japan was known to have large coal deposits and something else in abundance: whales. Whale oil, which literally greased the wheels of American industry, was a multi-million-dollar business. Whale hunters had depleted the North Atlantic oceans. Now America looked eastward to Japan.
If that double-bolted land Japan is ever to become hospitable, it is the whale ship alone to whom the credit will be due.
So wrote Herman Melville in his classic tale of the great white whale that haunted the waters off Japan. By the time Moby Dick was published in 1851, the United States was ready to assert its power.
Did everybody get the significance of the reference to the book Moby Dick?
Oh, that book.
I didn't read.
Right. Yeah. The well, that's published at the same time as Perry's expedition. The story of Moby Dick is this, this great big whale and Captain Ahab who wants to hunt this giant whale. Herman Melville from the Berkshires in Massachusetts, actually. It's the whale industry is actually right. It's kind of indigenous for America. It's kind of indigenous to New England, New Bedford, Providence, Rhode Island, some parts of Connecticut. Perry goes on this expedition to force Japan to trade. And in reality, it's the U.S. Navy, President Polk, right after the Mexican War, who wants to gain more territory to hunt for whales, because that's moving the country, using whale oil for the American Industrial Revolution. And this book that's published 2 years earlier, that's become a bestseller, has romanticized whale hunting. And the idea that, and already most American propaganda is in favor of westward expansion, manifest destiny. It's our destiny to be just like, Western Europe, and expand and expand and take more and take more. So I'm going to skip, I'm going to skip a little bit to the Japanese perspective on all of this. Here we go. And describe how forcing Japan to open started to change Japan radically. There we go. Where? Okay. Okay, so here Perry arrives. Here we go.
Cannons were loaded, guns were drawn. Perry came ashore. Perry presented his papers and delivered his ultimatum. He would be back, and he expected Japan to comply with America's demand to open the country for trade. If not, he was prepared to take Japan by force. He would return in the spring for his answer. Then he and his squadron left Edo Bay.
Their deportment and manner of expressions were
does everybody
exceeding.
know where Edo is? Edo?
What?
Edo is Tokyo.
Tokyo.
It was then called
Oh.
Edo.
Oh.
Tokyo, yeah. And we think of
Being the
Tokyo as,
arrogant.
this huge city with skyscrapers, but at this point in time, it's this quiet, sleepy little town
Back then as
with a
well.
few fishing boats. Yeah.
Ooh.
Was it the capital back then as well?
And the
What's that?
resulting
No, Tokyo is not the capital.
insult to our national dignity was not small. Those who heard could but gnash their teeth and suffer this
Oh, by the
insult
way,
in
all these
silence.
images that are clipping to, this is all Japanese art of the event. So we're looking at Japanese perspectives on how they saw these Americans coming in.
All those who heard could but gnash their teeth and suffer this insult in silence. After the barbarians had retired, a certain person drew his sword and slashed to bits a portrait of their leader, Perry.
There was great fear of Perry. There were the portraits of Perry as a devil. There were the portraits of his ships belching fire. All of this served to whip up, near hysteria on the part of portions of the Japanese populace. At the same time, there's fascination. There's fascination with Perry. There's fascination with these ships, these enormous ships that hadn't been seen before. There's fascination with the technological prowess of the Americans.
To complicate matters, the shogun had died, and the new shogun was mentally unfit. His advisors took charge, but they could not reach agreement.
The head of the shogunate decides that he is going to poll all of the daimyo in Japan. What should the shogunate do? This is a radical break with tradition. The authority of the shogunate is to deal with foreign relations. And the title of the shogun, of course, is the great barbarian quelling generalissimo.
The fact that this young leader cowers to the Americans' demands, how do you think that looks to Japan itself?
Very bad.
Bad.
Right. So right. So rather than, does everybody see the ripple effect right here that's going to happen? These outsiders with better weapons, better technology, come here, push us around, force us to, make our leadership look weak. And then within a couple years, Japan is going to quickly modernize. Whoops. That's not what I'm looking for. This one. All right. Within a couple years, a couple decades, I should say, by 1942, take a look at this. Japan is all over the place. What was the weak country being pushed around, they have invaded their neighbors. They were occupying this much of China. Formosa was the name of, this was the Dutch name given to Taiwan. Taiwan got colonized several times. It went from being Chinese to Japanese to Dutch, which is why Taiwan's got it's kind of a multi-faceted, multicultural part of China. And then there was occupation in spotty parts of China. They also occupied Vietnam, Thailand, all the way to Burma, all the way across Malaysia, Indonesia, and just touching Papua New Guinea, across the Solomon Islands, right at the backyard of Australia and the Philippines, which at the time was a U.S. territory, and Hong Kong was a British territory. So yeah, who could explain, if I look at this, if you just look at 1942, this map showing how much territory Japanese military is occupying in the Second World War. Who could give me the backstory? How does Japan go from being, you know, the country that doesn't even have any guns to the country that is holding so much of the world at gunpoint? Who wants to go first? Oh, that's why I actually wrote here. How did this happen?
Oh, how did this happen? And so because
How did all this happen?
the US. Wait, is that so?
You're on the right track. Keep
So
going.
the
Keep going.
US want them to trade oil, so they'll get them like weapons, and they got powerful.
Oh, well, not trade oil, but
The-
U.S. wanted
yeah,
to hunt for whales to get oil and force them to trade and, you know,
yeah,
be present in their
lives.
you know, yeah, under the American sphere of influence.
So they
right?
got powerful, and they're like, I'm powerful now, so I wanna beat other people
Yes.
up. So they did it, and then they succeeded it. So they just start
Yeah.
beating everyone up.
Yeah. This is kind of a way to understand what would be known as Axis powers in the Second World War, because the rest of Chapter 2, I don't like how fast it gets into World War II, but you're going to see a similarity between these three. Okay. Well, four actually. Spain, Germany. This is like a preview of the rest of Chapter 22 right here. Spain, Germany, Italy, and Japan. These are going to be known as Axis powers in World War II, and they're going to abide by this new form of military-based hyper nationalism called
Fascism?
fascism. You got it, fascism. So here we go. Fascism. So what all these countries, who could tell me by 1942, when Japan is, you know, occupying territory around its orbit, is forcing its neighbors, is occupying its neighbors' territory. What does this have in common with Italy? And don't worry about Spain, that's more complicated. Italy and Germany. What was Germany's agenda in World War II as well?
Oh, no, I don't know if this is right. Never mind. I want to say the Holocaust, but it would.
Well,
Sorry.
yes, the Holocaust as well. Yes, right. The Holocaust. Well, the Holocaust, the Nazi Holocaust, as we know it, is this forced removal of Jews, Gypsies, communists, primarily Jews, and full-on, you know, genocide. But most of the Holocaust took place in, guess which country that Germany occupied after 1939? Poland.
Wow.
Germany's neighbor.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you look at again, if you think of the Holocaust, what's the city that comes to mind that where one of the biggest concentration camps was?
Auschwitz.
Auschwitz, yes. I mean, and you guys live in Newton, so you have your neighbors are a lot of people who, you know, fled, you know, Eastern Europe after the Holocaust. The rich kind of the long Jewish tradition in that neighborhood. You probably are very familiar with that, but that's Poland. Auschwitz is in Poland. Bialystok, Poland, there was an uprising, a Jewish uprising to against the Nazis. But the death camps weren't really set up so much until the late 30s. The gradual sort of dehumanization of Jews That had been going on in Eastern Europe for a while. Remember the word anti-Semitism?
Yeah.
Pogroms. Jews were kicked out of Poland. You had this kind of Jewish community fleeing to Harbin in China. Essentially, the rights and the Jews had gradually been this like migrant scapegoated community across Europe for a while, but it's right in the 1930s that the Holocaust really kicks off, and it's Poland where the death camps are. But what does Germany have in common? Well, here's a similarity. Heilongjiang, right around here, there were concentration camps as well. Korea, the Japanese, forced a lot of women to do some pretty unspeakable things. If we look at Nanjing Datuse, there's a big similarity.
I know
right
that one.
Right. So you do have this full-scale killing of people, and people, because of their ethnic backgrounds, are targets. So it's very easy to compare Japan to Germany at this period of time. But Japan is doing a lot of this killing in the late 30s. 1937 is what happened in Nanjing. Let me think. How does a country going? So here we go. If we look at all this aggression and the horrific things a lot of these countries are doing, how do they get to that point? What is the rationale?
They got powerful.
Well, it's more complicated than that. A lot of the rationale is almost like the idea behind fascism is that, and this dangerous idea is that at some point they felt like they were being picked on. And for Japan, that's the Americans forcing them into a treaty. For Germany, that's going to be the breakup of the Prussian Empire and also the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. What were the terms of the Treaty of Versailles?
Didn't Germany lose a lot of land or something?
Well, they lost a lot of money. They had to pay. They were forced to pay through the nose. But eventually, what turned Germany into this, what essentially made Hitler this appealing leader, is that Hitler started blaming other countries in Europe for all of their economic problems, and blaming ethnic minorities for all of their economic problems, and that started to whip up this hyper nationalism within Germany, as was the same thing happening in Japan. Italy, Mussolini became their leader, and they tried to invade. They started off invading countries in North Africa and East Africa. And also the same narrative for Italy was, we were once great. We had the Roman Empire. And it was other countries that pushed us around, forced us into, and into a position that we didn't want to be in, and now we're strong again. So essentially, the narrative of all these countries is, our problems are because of the foreigners, and we're going to make Germany great again. We're going to make Japan great again. We're going to make Italy great again. Get it?
Yes.
So that's essentially fascism. It's getting people's, it's creating this public anger at the rest of the world, that our problems are because everyone else created our problems. And then it gets really dangerous because people start to rationalize horrible things. Spain also was a fascist country, but Spain had a civil war. Francisco Franco, who was funded by Hitler, most of the military came from Germany, like Franco's planes and military equipment came from Germany, but Spain didn't occupy territory outside of Spain. But Spain was also allied with these three. So that's kind of a little prelude to the Second World War. The rest of chapter 22. But before we get to the Second World War, guess what we got to learn about?
The first one?
You got it. You got it. So that was like a
Oh.
sneak peek at World War II. Sneak peek, but let's get to the first one. We can't get through the second one before we get to the first one. Here we go. Here we go. All right. I'm going to show you, I'm going to give you your homework first, and then I'm going to show you an interesting way to understand World War I. Here we go. Homework. Okay. This week, I'm going to ask you to write a couple of paragraphs, and one will be about the Depression. One will be about the US stance in the First World War. So I'll actually, I'll explain this and I'll put the homework in the email. Okay. I'm going to ask you to compare and contrast Woodrow Wilson's "Too Proud to Fight" speech of 1915 with his 14-point speech of 1918. Now, this speech was delivered at the beginning of the war. This speech was delivered at the end of the war. Now, you could probably guess how these two speeches are going to be different. What does "too proud to fight" imply?
They're not fighting.
I don't want to fight.
Yes, the Americans took a neutrality stance. Does everybody know what that means?
Yeah.
What does it mean?
Oh,
Not on either side.
Yeah, the Americans were out of the war for a majority of the whole war. Completely out of it, hands off, none of our business, neutrality. And that was actually what Woodrow Wilson campaigned on when he ran for re-election. We will not fight. This is not our problem. This is Europe's problem. But something happened which pivoted Wilson's policy from a neutrality stance to a hardline, hawkish warmongering stance. And then America goes all in for 2 years. What do you think is going to change?
Harvard.
That's a good guess, but you're thinking of the wrong war.
Oh wait, yeah. Okay.
But there's a similarity. There's going to be an attack and there's going to be casualties. And Pearl Harbor was actually an attack on a military base in Hawaii. This is going to be a civilian casualty, but you'll actually find out when you do the reading. And it's not going to be from planes. It's going to be from a German technology. I'm going to draw it right here. And there's a sandwich named after it. What am I drawing?
a submarine. Wait, no.
Yes, a submarine.
okay.
Okay. Yes, a submarine. The Germans called U-boats. Will actually an attack on a passenger ship, a British passenger ship with a lot of high-profile Americans, is going to be shot down, and that will change Wilson's stance on the war. So I'm going to ask you to look at these two primary sources: a speech at the beginning of the war where the Americans are out of it, and a speech at the end of the war where Americans are very much involved and actually calling the shots, or writing in the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. So also we're going to get into a little bit of economics. So after World War I, you're going to see a period of economic prosperity of the 1920s, a boom period for the Americans, as Europe is in a period of rebuilding. But then you're going to see a
Great Depression.
economic depression. Yes, the Great Depression. And there are these two economists who have different theories about how to get out of the depression. One is John Maynard Keynes, and the other one is Friedrich Hayek. They have two totally different ideas about what to do to get out of the Great Depression in the 1930s. And it's kind of like comparing, contrasting Marx and Adam Smith, Keynes and Hayek. So yes, so that's your homework. I'd like you to just write a paragraph here, 60 to 100 words, maybe a little more. Describe these two speeches and describe the two theories of these economists to get out of the Great Depression. And I'll put that in the email. I think it'll be fun. Whoops.
Fun.
Okay.
Ooh.
This is even more fun. This is a full explanation of World War I. So World War I has a ripple effect. There's an assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. It's also the name of a great band, Franz Ferdinand, by Gavrilo Princip, and gradually Europe will turn into open war. Would you like to see a really fun cartoon about how this happens?
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
here it is. I promise you this is a really fun cartoon.
Okay.
The politics of 19th century Europe were messy. What's changed? It was made up of various empires spreading across the world, trying to show each other who was the biggest power. They each built up massive armies to stave off war, thinking that everyone else would be too scared to fight against them, or so they thought. Things all changed when a gang of Yugoslav nationalists who didn't like being part of Austria-Hungary shot the Austro-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand while he was in Sarajevo. Swiftly, the Austro-Hungarian Empire declared war on Serbia. Russia came in to aid Serbia, so Germany decided to declare war on Russia. Knowing that France would go to war with Germany, Germany decided to attack France quickly and invaded via neutral Belgium and Luxembourg, and because of this, Great Britain stepped in to stop the Germans getting any closer. It was a mess of allegiances and old rivalries, with two sides forming, the Allies and the Central Powers. And so began what became known at the time as the Great War, the war to end all wars. A new form of warfare evolved as these fully industrialised armies with engines, machine guns, airplanes and new chemical gas weapons fought against each other. It was the dawn of modern warfare. At the time, national pride was at an all-time high and men were proud to go off and fight for their country. It was seen as a romantic idea to go off and be a hero. Boys as young as 12 managed to lie their way into the army ranks, only to discover that it was not such a sweet and honourable thing to die for one's country. Germany marched on Paris but was stopped by the French, and both sides dug themselves into trenches on what became known as the Western Front. On the Eastern Front, the Russians invaded Austria-Hungary, but were stopped in Eastern Prussia by the Germans. The Ottoman Empire joined in on the side of the Central Powers in 1914. More and more nations from all over the world joined the fight as the war spread across Europe. Trench warfare was quite terrible. Each army would dig a long network of trenches in the ground, fortifying the front with barbed wire and sandbags. It was a long stalemate where neither side dared advance on the other. Machine guns were a new and very effective weapon. When the time was right, the army would climb up over the top and charge across no man's land to the enemy trench and capture it, thus gaining more land and taking another step towards their goal. At least that was the plan. Spirits were high at least when the first Christmas came by. Both forces climbed out of their trenches to celebrate Christmas together and talk, share stories and play football. When Christmas ended, they would climb back into their trenches to become enemies once again. Conditions in the trenches were dreadful. Soldiers in France and Belgium found their feet rotting away from the constant damp. In contrast, Australian, New Zealand and Ottoman soldiers fighting in Gallipoli had blisteringly hot trenches where rain and cold were replaced with dehydration and overheating. Disease was everywhere in the trenches. 1916 saw a renewed push on the Western Front from both sides. Thousands of French died at Verdun as the Germans unleashed their chlorine gas. The infamous Battle of the Somme was a long and gruelling battle that lasted from July to November. The first day alone saw over 80,000 men wounded or killed, mostly British due to disastrous attacks. Fundamental errors and contradictions from the High Command led to confusion and unclear plans.
So that was fun, wasn't it?
Yes.
Went really
I've
Yeah.
seen a video
Oh.
like similar to this.
They went
Okay, I
really
like these guys. I'm going to stop it halfway through. The Americans are not in, but I'm going to give you a little sneak preview. Okay, whoops, that's not it. Casualties. Okay, if you look at casualties of the First World War, you can kind of tell who got involved when. So here's France. France was involved from the beginning. So total number dead, we got almost 2 million.
Oh my God.
If you look at, say,
a lot.
US is only 117,000. So you can pretty much tell, okay, these guys were in from beginning to end, like, okay, Austria-Hungary, almost 2 million. Germany, almost 3 million. Turkey, 2,300,000. You can kind of tell who was involved when and to what extent. It was really madness. You have all this new technology being unleashed and all these people who think it's a great idea to go die for your country. It's really a mess, a big mess. Last thing I'm going to give you before we leave, the one country will leave, will enter the First World War in 1917. That is the US. And simultaneously, when the US enters the war, another country will leave the war. Guess which country that is?
Ottoman Empire. No, I guess that's right.
Good guess. Good guess.
France.
It is Russia.
Oh, but
Guess
didn't
why?
they start the war? They
No,
were like in the
that's-
beginning.
That's Austria-Hungary and Serbia and Austria-Hungary.
Oh, never mind. Sorry.
Russia joined in eventually, but Russia is out. Guess why? Russia is out of the war.
They got cold feet.
Keep guessing. US is into the war at the same year.
Whoa.
Maybe they left because the US joined.
US joined.
Okay, I'm going to give you a name. Vladimir Lenin.
What?
I don't
The
really.
Russian Revolution.
I know him, but I don't really know much about.
The Bolshevik Revolution. Russia is going to have a violent uprising overthrowing the Tsar. And when the Tsar is out of power, you have the beginning of, guess what country?
The Soviet Union.
The Soviet Union begins. When the Soviet Union begins, Vladimir Lenin says, this is not our war. This is a capitalist war. And so the Soviets, we begin Soviet Russia. Dun, 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 dun. Exciting, right?
Whoa. Yes.
Yeah. So simultaneously, it wasn't because the Americans were coming in. That was coincidental. It was because Russia had went into total chaos itself and went under new leadership. Okay, that's it. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank
Okay.
you. Have a
Bye.
nice week.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.